These women, although they were victimized, are survivors. They survived a horrific encounter with some extremely violent offenders. They got through that encounter and they had the wherewithal to get in touch with the police and to give us enough information and detailed information to allow us to be in the position that we're in today, and that is with 2 of these suspects that have been arrested, a 3rd that has multiple warrants for his arrest, and a 4th that we're working to identify right now. The way this all began was that our first survivor met with one of the suspects back on the 16th, and this is the suspect named Emmanuel Greer. Met with him at a gas station, approached him and inquired whether or not he knew locations where she could purchase drugs in Austin. Through this exchange and this conversation, they exchanged phone numbers and a way that they could get in contact later. The victim then left at this point along with the other 4 ladies that were involved. And then what occurred was on the 16th, the victim makes contact with the first suspect, inquiring whether or not he is in possession of drugs, whether they can come over and purchase narcotics. They set up an agreement to meet at this apartment, and this apartment, as you all know, was located down on Burton Drive, and the 5 ladies involved in this incident drove down to that apartment complex. When they got there, survivor number 1 goes up to the apartment that she had been told to go to, knocks on the door, and is let into the apartment. When she gets into the apartment, she is immediately met by 2 of the suspects. They are armed with a handgun. They force her to undress, and then at that point, they bind her, and both of those suspects rape the first survivor at that point. They then use her phone after learning that there are other women in the vehicle with her, use that phone to text one of the other young ladies asking her to come up to the apartment. This young lady then returns up to the apartment. This is who we will now call survivor number 2, comes up to the apartment, and again, as this victim enters the apartment, she is immediately met by the suspect Greer, pointing a gun at her and demanding money. Survivor 2 was also made to remove all of her clothes, and she was subsequently bound and raped as well. Our suspect then uses the cell phone again to contact the remaining women that are down in the car, and these young ladies come up to the door, and they too are met by the suspects at gunpoint in order to undress. 2 of these 3 women were also raped by the suspects. The suspects were demanding information, wanted to know of other locations where maybe they could potentially rob other drug dealers, and they were going through the phones trying to locate this information. Not only were they being held at gunpoint, not only had they been bound and raped, but they were being threatened by the suspects that they were going to kill them, and they took specific actions to make them think that that was about to happen. At some point, the suspects left with one of the survivors to take them back to the motel that they were all staying at, again in an attempt to continue the robbery that they were conducting at that point and to get more information. This is when they returned to the motel that we described earlier on North IH-35. We do have video footage that supports this whole account. It shows the survivor along with the suspects that were with her going over to the motel, and it is here where she had the presence of mind and the ability to escape from her captors and to make that call to 911 that allowed us to get involved as early as possible. And while we were there working with the first survivor, trying to determine what had happened in the location of the other 4 women, they also showed up at the motel, and we were able to start the investigation. The survivors in this case were able to give us enough description of the event that we were able to get the necessary search warrants issued to gather the evidence that is necessary that will support the charges that are forthcoming in this case. There was a vehicle that was also in the video when they showed up at that motel after the assaults had occurred. We were able to track the license plate on that vehicle back to an address off of McMillian Drive. and we executed a search warrant at that location. And while serving that search warrant, that's where we located 2 of the individuals who fit the descriptions given by the victims, and 2 of which were ultimately identified as suspects in this case. So as of this point, we have 2 suspects that are currently in custody, and that is Dimitri Rogers and Christopher Jaramillo. We have the suspect Emmanuel Greer, who currently has 4 warrants for his arrest now. He has a warrant for a previous probation warrant, and he has warrants for aggravated robbery, aggravated kidnapping, and aggravated sexual assault. So we ask the public, if anybody knows where Mr. Greer is, it is important that we get him into custody, and that we can, again, move this case forward and begin to hold him accountable for the crimes that he's been alleged to commit. We are also working towards identifying that 4th suspect in this case. As of yet, he is still unidentified.